Great. Well, welcome back to the afternoon session, everyone. We're going to be starting off with the video on drones and extreme weather resilience. So one of the topics that we're going to get into more in the panel discussion is really thinking about what Texas needs to do for more and more of these extreme weather events. How do we think about resilience in terms of what needs to happen before, during, and after? So we're excited to have a great group of folks here for the panel discussion. And then to kick us off, we've invited Dr. Robin Murphy. She's a professor at Texas A&M University. She unfortunately wasn't able to make it, but she sent us a video to help frame today's discussion.
Well, howdy, I'm Dr. Robin Murphy. I'm a professor of computer science and engineering here at Texas A&M, and I would like to talk with you about robotics for extreme weather events. I am so sorry that I'm teaching class and can't be there right now to talk with you in person. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a professor, a responder. I've been working with the Federal Highway Agency on drones in particular for disasters and how that works with the different state DOTs. So the four things I'd like you to remember from this talk is that first, that drones are in fact very useful on how you can respond to extreme events. But the second point is those drones that you're using for construction monitoring and drainage and checking things like that out, they can also be used during an emergency to support other emergency support functions like search and rescue. And third, I said it was robots, not just drones. Unmanned, unpersoned surface vehicles, surface equal marine water surface vehicles. Those are going to be really important too, I think, in the future. And then to me, the most important thing for you to remember is please let me know how we can work with you to learn more about what you do and how we can advance the science and robotics that you need. But let's just start off with this idea that drones are useful for how you can respond to extreme events. So here's a case, Hurricane Michael. I've been in 30 disasters, not of my own making. Hurricane Michael is one of the recent ones. And you can see this is a drone, a fixed wing. In 7 minutes, it's flown the entire length of Mexico City Beach. And you can see the condition of the roads down there. And as you get up closer, you can see over to the left, everything is wiped. All the small houses are just totally gone. Most of the condos are there, but the bridge is taken out. And that you're in that creek, that river goes further back, and it's very hard to get into there from either side. So you're going to have to start going around about a 40-mile around to get around to the other side on how you deploy the assets. Let's look at something more recent. Let's look at Hurricane Ian. We were part of the Florida team down there. This is the approach to the Sanibel Bridge from the mainland. This is again from a quadcopter, not at a particularly low altitude. We can fly lower and closer. This is just there, but I think what you're going to see is that this is providing a different view than you get from the Black Hawk helicopters and the news chopters that are going higher and looking straight down. And these are drones that you can control or tell us pilots how to fly. Here's the other end of that going into the other side of the island to the bridge. Now, of course, I have no clue as what's good and bad, and that's one of the things that one of the techniques we train is for y'all to embed with us so that we can see what it is. But you also can do things like this is 4K resolution, so you can back up. When you do screenshots, you've got very good resolution on the video. We can take single shots, like I said, move in closer, whatever you'd like. So that's one thing, right? You're thinking floods, hurricanes. Certainly we get enough of those in Texas. Of course, we're pretty famous for that. Hurricane Rita, 24 hours of total gridlock. And we've been working a little bit with the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency. They're worried about getting a Virginia I-95 type of scenario. And you can see that in these things, drones can provide you not only the view to say, yeah, there's a lot of cars there, but what's the access? Are there any roads or any shortcuts? Or if we just had that utility road and cut that fence, we'd be able to get to people. Those kinds of things, and that's also useful during tornadoes, but those sorts of things are things that may be of great value. Now, the second point is that you've already got a lot of drones. I mean, you're using that for your construction monitoring, you're doing for some of that for your surveying, your land surveying, and so in an emergency, you can use those. Florida routinely, North Carolina, their DOT, famous for their use of drones at Hurricane Florence. They wound up doing anything with the drone for the state for Hurricane Florence was through the Department of Transportation. And so learning how to work with other agencies and what they need for the 14 emergency support functions, that's something we can help train on, but really an important use and something to be keeping aware of. The third thing, though, is don't forget about marine systems. So water-based, marine-based robotics, very useful. Let's just look at what we did back Hurricane Ike at Rollover Pass. So you got a robot boat, a little kayak boat. But with these advanced sonars, these acoustic imagers, you're not only getting to see the scour, if there's scour underneath the footings, but you're getting to see what is the upstream debris. And there's a lot of marine vehicles that you can look at. There's now the smaller versions that of a kayak, kind of a single surfboard size, the Emily system that we've been working with NOAA and the National Science Foundation, the Emily series that carries a sonar. But you've got the ROVs, the tethered, the square ROVs that can carry a lot and can actually have a manipulator. And you have the underwater autonomous vehicles, the little torpedoes or manta ray looking ones. Those are fully autonomous. Some of the challenges there are that you harder to control, not as good for bridge inspection and stuff. All right, so that's really fast, but the really important point again is please let me know how we can work with you. We need to learn more about what you do. Hopefully this gives you some ideas, and tell us as researchers what we can do to advance the science and do this synergistically. Here's some resources on drones. Drones have been the big win. Like I said, don't forget about the marine vehicles, and anything we can do to help, just let us know.
And with that great presentation from Robin, I think we really highlighted that there are a great mix of emerging and new technologies that can both respond and plan for these emergency weather situations. But I think what something that was really highlighted in this presentation was the importance of coordination and communicating both internally and between agencies. And so that in one side, dealing with whole set of new issues with other emerging mobility technologies like EVs. That's a whole new set of problems. And how can we align these two mobility efforts to kind of best or even better prepare and respond to these weather situations? So with that launch in this video, I'll hand it to Amy Ashley with the with Austin Energy.
It's great to be here with all of you today. So climate impact is here. The weather events that we are seeing are extreme. They're unexpected, and we are no longer in response mode. We are in what's the plan? We're in preparation mode. So we are here today on this panel to specifically address reliability for transportation and what that looks like. How are we going to make sure that evacuation can occur properly, or that we can support any other emergency services in the wake of these what formerly were unprecedented events. We can no longer say that that storm is the 1 in 100 year storm, because they're here and we are living in and experiencing, and everyone here in this room, you all know exactly about that. So I'm hoping we can talk a lot about the balancing and advancing of these technology solutions for extreme weather preparedness and resilience. The video that we saw was wonderful, and how many in here are already utilizing drone technology to support their efforts? We are here at the utility in Austin, and in the city of Austin around disaster. We're utilizing drone technology to help us find down lines, to help us in disaster, and to help promote public safety. But today we're going to be focusing on connected vehicles, on the flood warning systems, flood sensors, and also on this ecosystem of technology solutions to help us become prepared. I'd like to introduce our panel. Before we get started, we have John Esparza, CEO and President of Texas Trucking Association. We have Carl Novelli, Assistant VP of WEJO. And then we have Brian Mason here, Executive Director of Houston Transstar. And again, my name is Amy Ashley. I'm with Austin Energy Electric Vehicles and Emerging Technologies. I'm the Senior Lead for the EV Equity Program. I'm working to bring frameworks of equity to our historically underserved community members, the same people that are the most greatly impacted, the lowest resourced of our community members when storms hit. I'm going to be providing moderation for this panel today, but I'll also be able to provide some insights on what we're doing here locally for electric vehicle resilience in these times of weather events. So without further ado, why don't we get started here with letting the panelists each introduce themselves, giving you a little bit of background, and also if you guys wouldn't mind just giving us a little bit of your initial response to the video that we saw. Start with you, John.
Very good. John Esparza. I have been serving this position now for about 17 years, if I can believe that. 10 years prior to that in state government. And I probably rather uniquely, and I think why we've, at least I feel like as an industry, it's certainly helped me in coordinating some of the efforts as of late. During my time in state government, I spent quite a bit of time with executive office as a HAP or liaison to the emergency response. So I recall back in the days of Hurricane Rita, Hurricane Katrina, some of the challenges that I saw in the room and communications always being key and critical to that, but was probably more alarmed a dozen years later when we're going through some of the same things that I saw some very similar challenges. And my expectation was, well, I knew that taught that we learned this, this many years ago. But what I think is even more critical, and I'm talking about from the industry perspective, is that we didn't really do a good job as an industry is really kind of documenting or creating a plan so that we've learned from, a disaster within the next, 20 years ago. 5 years later, where are we? Partially because you have a lot of personnel change. You have a lot of different people in the room. And even at the capacity that I've served to date, I can go down and see there's just different players and people, and how much institutional knowledge do you lose when you something like this happens? Yeah, boy, talk about every 100-year storms. How many of those have we had in the last 7 years? We keep hearing that, so I think that is more the norm. And then continue to get unique things thrown at us. I continue to look at COVID, for instance, and the industry's response to that as we wanted to approach it very similar to how we would a hurricane. You see the weather, the radar's telling you something, it's coming. You make pre-preparations, then you hunker down, and then you recover. It just seems like we just never got into recover as quickly as we had all anticipated as an industry. So it was rather unique. So what we have done is we've spent time with our individual carriers in making sure that we each has a plan. Because if I gave you this as an example, during one of these hurricane events, it kind of put really to me in a perspective, and I think as importantly, the communications that we were having back and forth at that time with the governor's office in, hey, look, here's what we understand the issue, here's what we're trying to do. But if I had a carrier that was a fuel hauler and had 100 vehicles, and on that particular day, if they were moving those vehicles, and this was a set schedule of movement of fuel, that's disrupted with the event. Okay, no. And then the event comes through, and now you're a day, 24 hours, 48 hours into this, so there's stress. And if you don't have a good communication plan, first thing you're trying to do is locate, how's everybody? Where are my drivers? How are they doing? Where are they? where is their access to their equipment? So that if we're requested, we need 100 tankers. At the moment that you're called, well, I can find 24 of those drivers currently. Of those 24, all of them are fighting the same issue that the whole rest of the state in this particular area are fighting. So effectively, I've got 6 or 7 that can actually move equipment. And if you move that mode of equipment to the refinery, and because of the confusion, because of the things that are going on, we had, I think, 4 of those 7 on that particular day, on that particular company that was trying to render aid. Well, 4 of the 7 were denied access for fueling because their quota had already been filled by that particular company. So there's room for improvement, most certainly. And I think we've continued to do that by learning from that. How do we avoid that moving forward? And the second thing I'll mention that was tremendously helpful, but it is not just okay, I need help and it comes your way. You have to stay equally as involved when the sun's out here and everything's fine, where we have a network, what we call an Allen-Aid network. It is a stakeholders, national stakeholders group in which we are in constant communication. We meet weekly, and if it's Nashville, if it's Virginia, wherever there's an issue, we're all helping to address those needs, and it worked for us. So when we were in need and we were introduced to this network, I've not been a part of that network since, because of the immediate aid that was sent, whether it was fuel, water, resources, what have you, coming out of Illinois, coming out of Arizona, just coming out of anywhere. But as importantly, ensuring that we were moving quickly, because I think that's always the case. No matter what you might pre-stage, there's a lot of that. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about what you learn through the networking and the resources and the ability to communicate quickly and what those needs are. We're able to satisfy those. Even when you have volunteers, we had a SEAL teammate team coming out of Virginia, if I'm not mistaken, wanted to render aid. They brought a specific skill set. They were trying to offer that skill set in an area in which it should have just taken them up automatically. Through a relationship that we had, I was contacted the right person in the governor's office, and then they were put to work. It's always about the communication.
It's great, and we will, that's one of the 4 topics that we're going to get to. So thank you so much for all of that historical information you provided today, and we'll be building upon all of that. Carl, would you please introduce yourself and give us your perspective? If you want to respond to that video, that'd be great too.
Yeah, of course. And again, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. So my name is Carl Novelli, and I work for a company called WeJo. So we essentially are a connected vehicle data provider. So when we say connected vehicle data, what we mean is data directly from the vehicles going up into the cloud to ourselves, standardized, anonymized, and then provided out the door to end users like TxDOT, as an example. So right now we see on average anywhere from 3 to 7% of all journeys on the US roads, with over 14 million vehicles providing us this information in every 1 to 3 seconds. So I come at it with a slightly different view, and sort of following on from that video that we saw, which was unfortunately horrific. You see the damage, you see what's happened, you see the output of the storm. We can see the during, we can see the before. So when we think about the resilience and the planning side, if you imagine a storm comes through here, there's an evacuation warning. Well, what do people do? Do they evacuate? Do they leave 24 hours before? Do they wait? Do they hunker down, to use your term? Rather than having folks in high-vis jackets by the side of the road trying to do this or send out surveys and things like this, you now have at your fingerprints, get my teeth in, a resource that can actually show you where the vehicles went, how they were being driven. Did they use the evacuation route, using that I-95 example? Did they wait? Did they sit? Did they stand? Did they want to wait till the very last minute? And then, for example, in Florida, when there's a storm, instead of evacuating the area, do folks jump in their cars and drive to hard infrastructure? Does that mean that that needs investment? Where do we need to look at good evacuation routes, poor evacuation routes, signage and those kind of things? But understanding actually what happened. And this data asset is here and can be used for that purpose to then help with the planning to hopefully get better.
Thank you. Brian, would you like to respond to that and also give us an introduction?
Sure will. Once again, thank you for having us. So Brian Mason, been with Transtar only about 6 months or so. So I'm still drinking through the fire hose when it comes to Houston Transtar. Good thing about Transtar, if you guys aren't familiar, it's a consortium of the city of Houston, Harris County, TxDOT, and Metro, all in one roof and one facility. So we all work really closely on a day-to-day basis, just managing normal rush hour, or if there's an incident or an event. And I think kind of tying in the video, one of the challenges that we see, especially during a big incident, is taking a lot of the information that's out there and turning that into useful intelligence for our decision makers. There's a lot of data that's coming in, and how do we actually summarize that and provide a good overview to where the judge or the mayor or whoever needs to make a difficult decision, that information is readily available for them. So usually for us, following a storm, we would do a lot of things initially with helicopters, whether it's HPD or DPS. We'll do some initial overflights and do what we call them rapid needs assessments, figure out areas that are significantly impacted. Then we would move into drones and more of the detailed stuff to get a better view on, what's really going on in that area. So technology is very important. It's something that we are constantly trying to increase and incorporate into our decision making. But usually with a lot of our technology, our decision makers prefer to have a visual confirmation as well. If they're going to make a pretty difficult decision, yes, we have TxDOT data from what's going on the freeways. Yes, we can put cameras, but we try to get some other viewpoint, a person or somebody out there to give a real assessment of what's going on before we ask someone to make a real difficult decision.
Wonderful. We have a lot of challenges and opportunities, as you can see, of ways that we can collaborate to bring all this technology together to really serve the communities. We have 4 discussion topics. What I'd like to do, pardon me for using my phone, but I'm going to keep us on track. So I need to set my timer here. Stopwatch. All right, here we go. So we're going to start with scalability. The question is, what are best practices related to scaling your solutions within the region as well as across the state? And we're going to kick it off here with Brian with Houston Transtar's flood warning system.
So I guess a good thing or a bad thing about Houston is we have lots of events. So we're used to responding to lots of things. We kind of have a joke down there that if it rains on your roof, you should have flood insurance and be prepared to flood because it's pretty flat and we have some challenges down there. But the flood warning system, so Transtar, shameless plug for our app. We have an app and a website. We try to encourage people to download them. Back in the day, when I was in Houston 15, 18 years ago, the Transtar map was kind of the key thing everybody went to. And then now we have cell phones with Waze and Google, and it kind of shifted some focus off our map. But on the map, we incorporate Harris County flood control data. So they have all the bayou information, what's going on in the bayous. We incorporate National Weather Service data. So as we're getting radar data, if we get greater than an inch of rain in 15 minutes, which we know is going to start to overwhelm our underground drainage system, we expect ponding to occur on the roadways. On our map, we'll start to put up little dots with some little circles around them, letting people know there's been high rainfall in that area and there is a good probability that there's going to be ponding on the roadway. Our first responders are able to use that as well. We're able to correlate kind of 911 CAD data coming in with those dots popping on the map. We usually see some type of correlation. So we're able to give the first responders a heads up that you're probably going to get some calls, or vice versa. They'll let us know that your map's probably going to start to turn in this area. Once again, it's just a warning system. It's just to let people know that you may want to avoid that area. And then we can start to move some resources and, field folks out to that area to support anything that could be happening out there.
Do either of you have any information you'd like to share on the work you're doing around scalability.
Yeah, sure. You look at everything, even when it comes to a study, how big a sample size are we taking and how applicable it is to what we're attempting to do. Folks in this room, whether it's to say what's an accurate sample for us? What is a more scalable sample size that while we as an association represent the trucking industry, so much of the industry is, 85, 86% of the industry are really easy to on whether it's policy or is practice to just represent large companies. And that's something that we have to do internally, is to look at the scope of our board and our leadership and know that there's a lot of folks participating in this, but they're running 200 trucks, they're running 2,000 trucks. We can't lose sight of the fact, that the majority of those motor carriers are small carriers, and how decisions that we're making, whether it's a policy level or whether it's trying to scale something that is a response to improving emergency management and from the trucking perspective, that it actually fits them. So we've certainly taken precautions to ensure that we are talking to smaller companies and ensuring that we are understanding how that will apply at that level. And more often than not, the communication just simply gets more basic at that level of a company. And Laura and I talked about communications and didn't do a very good job at all answering your question. To that video, it's easy to see by seeing what we just witnessed that drones are important, and that's going to be critical. But I can't tell you how many times on the trucking side, on the disaster management side, that a driver simply, you're sending him into an area that's a little unknown. Your communication with folks on the ground is going to be basic, and sometimes it's often moving. And they want assurance that I can go where I'm supposed to be, and if it's safe to go where I'm supposed to be. So the utilization of drones, I think, moving forward is going to be an incredible improvement to just putting the guy or gal in the cab at a bigger assurance. I mean, very often they just, hey, John, can a local sheriff, a constable, can I follow someone, as opposed to just, I know the route, but I don't know what it's going to look like when I get there. And
Or is the GPS working?
Absolutely. And we can't give them that assurance and just effectively say, just stay in close touch with us and we'll make calls on your behalf.
So just from our side, we're doing a couple of things when it comes to scalability of our solution. So, and specifically, I think, Brian, you made the point around, there is a lot of data out there right now. There's a lot of information that needs to be utilized and understood and done something with, those sort of layers of the story. So right now we are providing passenger data, which is great. So we see what's going on during those daytime hours predominantly, because that's when folks are driving their cars. What we're also looking to bring on board is actually freight data as well, to cover those during the nighttime hours. So again, then we'll be able to understand what's happening if a storm comes across, see the impact on freight trucks. Are they slowing? Are they not slowing? We saw an example that Purdue University in Indiana did using the 2020 storm that came across the US, where they could track on the I-80 the movement of the storm in this vehicle data, which is great. So we're scaling in that direction. The other side that we're scaling as well is by looking at, in each vehicle, there's hundreds of sensors providing information. Again, we don't provide it all because it becomes noise. You can't see the width between, there's too much information and you've got to do something with it. So we've tried to be very key and say, okay, what's useful? What's going to help? So specifically for this conversation, we see windscreen wiper, state change in speed. So now, rather than having specific weather stations in and around, and if you think about the issue outside of Washington, DC, where there was a 24-hour delay when snow came in and they all got stuck on the road, The problem that happened was there were two weather stations and the storm came through the middle. And quite simply, they couldn't see it. They didn't know what the impact was going to be. Obviously, Doppler knew there was a storm coming, but they couldn't catch it in time. So now you've got vehicles out on the road that can provide windscreen wiper state change in speed. So you can start to understand, is it raining on my roadways? How heavy is it raining by the windscreen wiper state? We're also capturing temperature as well. So this is something that we're really working on. Today, we can provide that information, is yesterday's information today, which is great. And that's an advancement because going back to my original point, understanding what happened during the storm, that tells the story to help plan and fix. But we're working to move that to as close to real time as we can. So that's something, big challenges, big sort of goal, but that's something we're working on.
Great stuff. So let's move on. We're going to be talking about freight, and I will direct this to you first, John. What steps can TxDOT take to support freight traffic in preparation for and responding to a disaster? And you've already spoken to some of that. Is there anything more specific?
Yeah, gosh, I'm hearing Ed Emmett in my ear when I'm thinking about this. But I thought he had brought some really, really important data post the last storm to one of our working groups. And it was effectively the RFID devices that are in certain trucks that volunteer that information under the protection of privacy to the, in this case, I think it was American Transportation Research Institute, which basically tracks freight and aggregately provides it to all of us. We've all seen it and shows us what's occurred. During that time, we got the real similar, you got the actual what's happening right now. And you could scale those slides as to what time that Hurricane Harvey, in this case, moved through and what occurred with all the freight. But it also gave us patterns of what they're going to do inevitably. So it wasn't just a, call John Sparzo, see what they're going to do. It was, I'm going to watch what they're going to do. It's being able to utilize that actual data. And we're well on the way with that with TxDOT. And that's what we know. And that's important, is that we have the ability to take real-time data and look at what's occurred in the past and make pretty accurate predictions as to what's going to occur when it comes to the movement of freight and ingest the communication on, when we talk about pre-staging, whether it's assistance pre-staging ice and water and things that the industry can help doing. A lot of that's done through the emergency management systems as it is, but we're always, responding to those requests when it comes to additional need and predictability. I mean, not uncommon, or probably won't come as a surprise to the folks in this room. Just in the last week, I think, week 10 days, I received an email from the freight group that is tied into the DPS and the NIM Kids emergency management folks, and it said, beginning to prepare for a event in April of 2024 that we knew was certain. Here is data of increases that we saw on vehicle freight movement, hotel motel in Tennessee for the lunar eclipse. So areas of the state that are rural in particular and showed us, this is a town of 30,000 people plus whatever. I'm thinking like Lampasas, of which is going to be in the dead center of that eclipse when it comes up. The amount of people, the amount of movement of freight, the amount and freight that's going to be required to support the amount of influx of folks that are going to be there for that week. It seemed to me like, really? But no, yeah. I mean, you look at the Tennessee stats from the most recent one, and that was a great map for us to look at this and go, we need to start thinking about this. It's a year away, but what problems is that going to give and institute on smaller communities, especially that can't sustain the type of, F1 visits that we have here and are getting used to it.
Anyone else?
I think from sort of our standpoint, it's about giving the freight information as quickly as possible. And sometimes, to your point a little bit earlier on, is if you know that a storm has come through, as an example, and you're relying on a trooper that you're going to follow through to get somewhere. Well, if you can start to see in the data that actually vehicles are making that journey and they're doing this speed, that can be another layer of information that's fed back into the freight industry to say, actually, we can see the road is open because folks are using it. And again, equally, if there is a blank in the data, i.e., no one's going down that road, it's probably because there is an issue, whether that's a crash, whether that's whatever it may be. So the data is there, and it's about them feeding. It goes back to the communication. And I think the point that Brian made as well is there's so much data, but it's also how do you use it? How do you set up practices and processes to get the greatest output into the right hands? That's really a key for it.
And just one other maybe example, maybe on a little bit smaller scale, big event Harvey, but when Harvey happened, obviously a lot of the city was flooded and not passable, and getting people from evacuated areas down to the GRB, what may have been a 15-minute drive on a normal day may have taken 2.5 hours because you had to snake through all different roads and corridors to be able to get to that location. So we were figuring all that out. We had a call center set up. People were calling in, and we were trying to help navigate people as best we could. But hearing all this data may be available, a lot of it's state trooper, HPD, when you're out driving around, let us know what you're seeing, and we're able to kind of cobble together those routes or whatever roads are passable. So knowing that hopefully soon that data is readily available to where people call us when the truckers are trying to come in, they're calling us, hey, is I-10 passable? Can I get in here? Can I get in there? And to have that readily available and tell them, if you're coming here, you need to exit here, you need to do this, you need to do that, would be a lot better getting those resources in, and would take a lot of that burden off our troopers and our police department who's out there trying to figure that out in the field in real time.
Right, so we'll move on now to electric vehicles, and I'll ask the question and then I'll respond a little bit on the EV side of it, since that's sort of the technology that I'm focused on. And then we'll pass it through because I know there's a lot of other ideas and thoughts around this nascent technology that's becoming accelerated in terms of adoption of electric vehicles. So what infrastructure and other considerations should be made to support electric vehicles during evacuations and power outages? So what we're doing here in the city of Austin is we are really focusing on making that public charging network that we have right here in Austin, and that we're working to have connectivity with other cities within the state to make those charging ports and stations resilient by identifying them as critical load. So critical load is basically where we have ensured that these places and infrastructure will have power, like hospitals or nursing homes and residents who perhaps are on oxygen. So we want to identify that so we have that resiliency. One of the things that we're looking at with electric vehicles is also battery storage and V2G, vehicle to grid capabilities. That's really around grid resilience. When people are not evacuating, they are sheltering in place. We want them to have power. So the electric vehicles, some of them are being made V2G capable. One of the things that we're doing here in Austin is our bus system is going 100% electric, and we already have about 12 of those on the road, and Austin Energy has built the charging depot to support these buses. All of those buses are V2G enabled, and we're looking right now at how to create on-site generation, again, with that battery storage backed up. So that's just a little bit of highlights of what we're doing in terms of resiliency, and I'll throw it now to the panel.
So it's interesting when we say, all I talk about is data, and I apologize for that. I try and paint a bit of a picture with it, but essentially that's what we do. We provide data. We talk about how EVs are becoming a hub for people when a storm comes through, because then there's energy in it and they can get outputs. We thought we had a problem in our data set when the big snowstorm hit Texas, and it was really cold, the power went down, and all the kinds of issues. We saw vehicles turning on and not moving. We thought there's something wrong here. We've got a massive problem. People are turning on their vehicles and not going anywhere. And then we tied it back to what was happening from a weather standpoint. And quite simply, it was people living out their homes, getting in their vehicles, turning on their vehicles and charging their cell phones, warming up. And we can see that in the data. So to your point, it absolutely works. And that's something that people are used to using it because, again, our vehicles, we charge our phones. That's something that we're all kind of built into. So I think that's definitely the route to go.
We had a lot of impact here locally in Austin with electric vehicles, providing that safe haven for people. I'm sure you guys have seen the Ford 150 Lightning. Their whole marketing campaign is around powering your home in time of disaster. And that is coming, we're a ways off, but that is coming and it's something to consider.
I just maybe from an emergency management Transtar point of view, we've started to talk about EVs, especially with evacuation. If we had another Rita situation where we have to evacuate millions of people all at the same time, but normally it was a 3-hour drive to Austin, was taking people 20 hours, 24 hours to get up to Austin. To be honest, we don't really have a lot of great answers other than we know it's something that unfortunately our DPS brothers and sisters will be having to probably deal with a lot out on the freeways. But it's definitely something that we are talking about. We've just gotten pretty comfortable now on where we're going to stage tankers and how we're going to do gasoline and augment that along the route. And now we have to think about, for Houston, if you just, do simple math, if we've got 6.5 million people that have to evacuate, if, we have 3 or 4 people in a car, we're looking at, 2 million vehicles. And, that's a lot of charging stations that we're going to need along the route for them to go that far of a distance. So, we're thinking about it, but we don't have a lot of great answers right now, other than we are discussing.
I think one thing that also helps though is there is research happening in this right now. So if you look at generally how people drive EV vehicles because of the cost of charging on the road network and fear of range anxiety, that type of thing, generally speaking, people that own EVs will drive locally and then have another vehicle. We see that quite a lot.
Yeah.
That kind of does happen. However, there is FHWA, USDOT are looking at, for example, the National Parks Project. Are EVs going to the national parks? Are they unable to get there? Is there a charging desert? We hear this term. We heard it a lot at TRB. What does that look like? How can we understand it? How can we fix it? So one of the things that's starting to use our data for in that sense is where are they going? How are they being driven? Is nobody going to X national park because they can't get there? So part of that infrastructure bill money that's sort of floating down now around the charging infrastructure is hopefully trying to bridge some of those gaps as well. So that will help this conversation, but the challenge is time as always.
That makes, I'm glad y'all mentioned that, because even when I'm putting initial thoughts around this, Lauren, it was like, I don't know. The answer is simply, I don't know. What I do know is 2 things. It's not in place currently, clearly, for the trucking industry in particular. I think, whether it's a small carrier or a large carrier, and we have several large carriers that are engaged, but what they also are finding is they're willing and able to make a commitment. And this isn't even on the Texas side, but have selected locations in which they want to make that investment in the equipment and the infrastructure that it takes to charge. And again, not the state of Texas, but the city and state came to them and said, these are wonderful plans. We can't support them. We can't even begin to provide you with enough electricity to convert your fleet 50, 75 trucks to this at present time. And I think that's what was so frustrating for the industry to hear some of the mandates made in California, because the industry's looking at each other like, I don't see when that they don't see that happening that soon. And on top of that, while we're supporting what it takes to pave the way, i.e. Allow for that 2,000 pound tolerance that Cap Peter has to look at on a regular basis when it comes to the 8,000 pound truck for the batteries and equipment that it takes to move electric vehicles. And more likely, and in some applications already, those EVs at the truck and freight level, they're happening intermodal, they're happening cross-border. They're not going to be your over-the-roads quite yet. There's plans for that. But I'm going to liken it to a dozen years ago when the price of natural gas was at what it was. You know, $1.14 for natural gas, diesel was $4.25. There was a lot of interest in investing in dual fuel equipment, if not just natural gas equipment, and a lot of investment done at that time. But the scary part was infrastructure. And I'll pick on one of our good members, loves travel stops, 2 or 3 a month. You were getting press releases 2 or 3 a month for the next 16 months of new stations that were opening up in their network that were also had natural gas. So I'm confident that's going to happen. Where the tipping point will be for the trucking industry in particular is you're going to get the bigger guys get out there and they're going to start making those investments and able to piece together that distance. And then pretty soon there'll be the technology in place so that you don't have to worry about the range so much. The battery, we're still figuring out. So that's the other part that we're not there yet, and I don't know when we'll be there.
Yeah, I think so. Austin Energy, we have deployed a commercial grade battery storage deployment that we deployed with Department of Energy, and it's called Shines. It combines solar with battery storage, and we have been able to use it in time of need, and we're using it still as a study to understand how to proceed forward. One of the other things that we're working on that a lot of cities across the U.S. are getting our cities to net zero greenhouse gas emissions because of our dependence on fossil fuels. We are in this position of climate impact. So we're trying to figure out overarching. We are in a situation where we're seeing these more frequent storms. How are we going to back ourselves out of it? So we're going to constantly be chasing until we start addressing getting cleaner air into our atmosphere and just reduce the global warming. So it's kind of these conversations, how do we connect the dots for the overarching picture? And it really is essentially around safety. There's a lot of funds that are coming down through the government that will hopefully help deploy some of this infrastructure. It is still very, very nascent. Austin's doing great, but we really need to have that connectivity with the other cities here in Texas. There's a lot of movement, and the key to it is really this collaboration, working regionally together and having these conversations.
Well, I can also say this, and I think that we're having this conversation in many other areas of policy. It's such an investment. The equipment, to buy a truck, to buy a couple of trailers, it is such an investment that when any company, whether you're an owner operator, single independent guy, gal, or you own a company and you're wanting to maintaining a fleet, the investment in the equipment is done with a certain return on investment over a certain amount of time. So nothing's going to happen overnight. We understand that. And that's how we really have to chase the policy too. It can't be just put 2035 out there and say X amount of your fleet must be this. There's every motor carrier out there is going to fight that. They put so much investment and money into their existing equipment that it has a certain payback. It's no different than any of the vehicles that we own. We buy for our families. And we say, look, I want to get 8 years out of this, or whatever the case may be. You invest a certain amount of money into equipment and you expect a certain return on that investment. And a policy can disrupt the business pattern in a way that will cause a lot of pushback. And that's where's the common denominator and all that? And in an area in which, until that battery issue, I think, is solved, we're not real friendly with a lot of countries that are providing elements such as cobalt and the things that are needed for those batteries today. So to me, that tells me it's something that doesn't quite exist yet, or in a way that isn't at present time. And the nat gas tanks are a great example. When you had a compressed natural gas tank, you could push so much pressure into that tank, and they designed a way to effectively put much like the lining, to effectively put more space within the tank. It's like if you had hairs inside the tank, you allowed the molecules to attach to more places, you could actually pack more in that. We learned that through just the natural gas. What will that be for these batteries or the electric vehicle? I still think it's.
Anybody else on electric vehicles? All right, let's move on. This is our last topic. Let me again check the time. 6 minutes. Well, we've already really covered a lot around data. We're hearing a lot about data is king in all of this, and all of the work that we're doing in smart cities application. Data is everything. What are the next steps to improve data sharing? How can information be made available to the public? And let's look at this more through the lens of the customer and the everyday person.
As the data guy, you should.
I thought this was going to come my way.
It's yours. Start.
So I think the key when I talk about data, and I'm sort of looking at the bigger TxDOT picture here as well, is the data asset that we provide. It is consented, it's anonymized, but it's still important private data to a point. So the key is then, as TxDOT and the strategy team are starting to do, is manage that data asset in a concise way and provide outputs. So what I mean by that is, does somebody need a delivery of all this information? Well, no, because it's zeros and ones that don't really mean a lot unless you can code. What actually that person wants is, if I need to go from Houston to Austin, how do I go? That's really, so the key for me and for all of this element is understanding the use cases, understanding the problem, understanding the question. The data is there, and it's tying the two together. That's really the work that needs to be done. And that's something that the strategy team here are really focused on doing and utilizing. I think where it gets even more exciting, though, is looking at the data assets that are already within the building, or within the TxDOT infrastructure. There's a huge amount of information there. It's, and I used this term earlier on, layers to the story, like the drone footage we saw. It's tying them all together so then you can get a good holistic view of what is going on. Whether that's, what's the speed limit on this road? Is that road susceptible to flooding? If there's heavy rain coming in from windscreen wipers, are the percentage chances that there's going to be a problem going up? The data is there. The challenge now is about fusing it all together to provide the output to the gentleman or the lady who wants to know, there's a storm coming, do I need to evacuate? How long have I got to get out? Those are the key questions. I was rambling on, so maybe that helps a little bit.
I think that's great. And I want to bring up just sort of another topic within this is building trust with the community. So in order for us to get the messages out and for people to act on those messages for safety, they have to have that trust. Does anyone here have a specific community engagement strategy that you would like to share?
I might mention, because the issue of privacy is such a big issue, and even right down to the truck driver. I mean, they did not like when you put cameras on the trucks, much less the ones that were facing inward. Those are the ones that are still a problem, but now it has, time has shown that the data, what that camera can provide that driver, validates their driving. So, and for the carrier, it lets you know, hey, are we involved in an accident? Now we're at fault. Now we know that. So let's move forward. The issue of data and its collection, voluntarily, I think you do reach a point where what you were talking about earlier, it's if every single truck out there came manufactured equipped with a device that measured weather, and all the vehicles began to talk to each other and show, much like the Aurora technology, that when one truck's learning, it's learning system-wide. So every truck is learning. That's where we're going to need to be, and where I see us very soon in the collection of that data, so that it is dispersed and it can be basic data. There also has to be protections for liability in place under that as well, and that's we're seeing and have done work already in that area to push back the abuse of it. Because what will happen is, it's such a disruption, you know, insurance providers leave the state, or they add premiums to insurance because we're a larger problem to move freight in Texas for that reason, then they'll figure out other ways to do it. So I think we're on the way to correcting that, but I do think that it's exactly what you mentioned. It's going to be something within the manufacturers so that the engines can take basic equipment, but, you know, basic information is shared, and then you would have the ability, much like you do with the A-tree and the RFID that I mentioned earlier, that we'll share this information, but we'll share it in volume so that it's helpful. But I don't want to be able to protect my clients' rights and cargo, and they don't want that individual information out there. So I think that we're wrong the way.
And I think that's really important. I think that conversation goes hand in hand with data. So privacy, security, you know, and it's also providing the information to the public that we're not tracking micro lens. It's simply a mass of journeys to give a collective amount of information. And it's important that people understand how that works. And it's important as well that then if that trucking company says, you know what, I don't want to share any of my information, they have the ability to do that. And that's also equally key. It's opted in or opted out data, and that's a model.
And I appreciate that. That's really, I think, the essence of any good human-centered design program is listening. So fantastic. Do you have anything to add?
We're fortunate at Transtar. We work closely with TxDOT. They use TTI quite a bit, and they do all sorts of really cool data stuff for us. So usually it's normally we bring something up and they say, well, I need this set of data, and either we can find it or we can't. And usually they normally work out the tool for us. So we're pretty fortunate to have those partnerships.
Who disseminates your data, like to the public or?
So usually most of our stuff's through the website, through our websites, and then we have a lot of partnerships. So if people want TxDOT's data, they have to sign, agreements and be able to get some data. So we're pretty open. Harris County Flood Control shares data. Everybody shares data. Some people illegally scrape a lot of data, which we try to minimize that and encourage them just have a good partnership and an agreement, and we'll share, what we can with you. So most of our stuff is through our website or through our app to the public.
Well, I can say this also, in a testament to both the institutions in this room right now, between University of Texas and Texas A&M and TTI, that we get to do and look at a lot of data from other states and other states that are doing similar things. What's happening at TTI is really impressive, and UT, you're renowned, and they know this, but it's neat to be from this state and be in other states and hear how much they talk about the research that we're doing here through TTI and Center for Transportation Research. So my hats off to all of you for that.
And I will add that we have the Bay Area, Contra Costa County wants to come out and create a Transtar. They want to come out and meet with TxDOT and all the different partners. They hear about, Transtar around the country. It's kind of a leading thing. So that's, once again, that's a credit to all the partnership and to the state of Texas that we have a good reputation and people want to come and listen and learn, and how did we do it, and what are the lessons learned from when we set things up. So that's a kudos to the state as well.
Right. So burning questions. Do we have any questions in the audience?
Yeah, just an observation. If you go back to that notion of freeway mobility as a service, I think, Brian, the evacuation routes from Houston will eventually have induction loops in the pavement. And
Yep.
electric cars will charge themselves.
Hopefully. That'd be awesome.
A lot of us are working hard on that now, but maybe the chargers are an interim solution to something, but I'm intrigued, Brian, in your database, you're forecasting where the roadways may start to inundate. Are you working with the navigational data companies to turn those
Good question.
roadways off?
Yep.
And I'm really asking all of you, as a data panel, is the data sent to me for me to sort of figure it out? Or why can't the data turn off certain routes So the police doesn't have to respond to a flooded car because that roadway has disappeared from my path to get to grandma's house.
Yeah, from your GPS, from your Google or your Waze, we do, I don't know what y'all's relationships with them are like, but Waze is a very proactive partner. They're easy to, Google's a little bit more challenging. So when we have planned things, planned special events, planned routes, we obviously let them know. They update stuff into their apps. We encourage them to, you know, they scrape a lot of data from our website, and there's one of the partners, Waze is one of the partners, trying to get them to get into more formal agreements that we can share stuff with them. But, you know, real time on the fly, it's kind of difficult for all that data to get in to tell you, don't go this way, go that way instead.
Yeah, so we're trying to work with them. You're right. They're very difficult to work with. Google is Latin for difficult to work with. Waze is much better. But, you know, we're trying to reduce fatalities by eliminating cut-through traffic in neighborhoods. One of the things we're trying to do is eliminate, you know, from the navigational data. So now you have a person, you know, mad at the thoroughfare street, racing through a neighborhood, staring at their navigational data on their screen or their phone, and run over the 4-year-old child because they're going 60 miles an hour.
That's right.
Yeah. We can't get them to turn that off.
Yeah.
But, and this is maybe a legislative item, if the governor establishes a critical emergency to the state, and we now have something above you know, Google just acting like a good business partner, I can't imagine there couldn't be legislation to say, you know what? We're going to send data to your navigational systems and turn it off. We need fuel trucks to be able to come in.
Yep.
We may have dedicated roadways just for fuel trucks.
There's critical
So
resources.
fuel trucks are showing up in their navigational data, or lanes or managed lanes are turned over to the goods movement community. And certain roadways that inundate are turned off. If we go to where data can take us, we need to go where data can take us. And we can't be afraid of using the legislative branch to trigger. In what episode can Google, I hope no one from Google is. Sorry.
Apple Maps
When
is the
can
same way.
Google- when
Yeah,
can
pick on
Google
all of them.
no longer behave in their best interest and now has to at least temporarily behave in the public's judgment?
We see that in work zones is a big challenge as well, route diversions. So not even just a one-off weather event or an accident or something like that, where all of a sudden everyone's coming off a freeway and finding a route by a school, whatever it may be, you know, because they're just following their sat navs. But a work zone that's in place for a week, you see it in there. And I think not just feeding that into legislature, but also whoever is looking after the signal timing in that area at that local transportation element. If they're sat in a DMZ, whatever it may be, if they can start to get this information as well, and then they can just change the signal timing to prioritize certain routes, if it's a trucking route or something like that. So those are almost potentially quicker wins that can be picked up as well.
Yeah, so we have a new project with TxDOT on one of our freeways in Dallas-Fort Worth. If the incident or accident or construction occurs in this 10-mile stretch, because we have continuous frontage roads, the signals turn green. For the bypass to occur automatically as part of that process.
So the district office down in Houston has that set up for I-10 West in some areas. When the speed limit hits a certain threshold, they give longer pulls on the service road.
Yeah.
And so that's something they have set in their signal timing, which it helps.
So that's an example of the data driving the decision already, where you don't have to make the decision. You
Yes.
see it. That's why I say your flooding data actually should drive the networks to be turned on or turned on to the goods movement community, turned off to the public sector, to have a more reliable, if in fact climate change is going to become the regular event, then we need to maybe give authority to the governor to create this as a regular event, you know?
And then we've had a question come in online from Steve Ellenbeck. Steve, if you want to go ahead and unmute and talk about evacuation corridors.
Yeah, quick question. You know, we probably all have memories. As Texans have been around for a while, and when a hurricane's pointing towards Houston, and we see all the massive traffic jams going up 45 and everything. And you know, TxDOT did an amazing job of developing evacuation route strategies, deploying staff, deploying fuel bowsers, and doing all of that. As we continue this crazy push towards electric vehicles in this country, talking about very high penetrations. What do you recommend the TxDOT do to support mass evacuations with respect to EVs?
I think that's the $1 million question right now is, again, as we've kind of skirted around, the charging infrastructure right now isn't potentially there to support that. So it's the investment in what that looks like. And again, is the technology then going to catch up with potentially temporary charging infrastructure?
And I think the inductive charging was brought up, and thank you
Yeah.
for bringing that up. And that's something that we are testing and researching. Just a lot of learning. And the question always with electric vehicles is the chicken before the egg. Do we bring the infrastructure or do we wait for the demand? It's a little bit of a cat and mouse game, but it is early conversations and we will get there. Let's get ahead of it. So we're not going to be experiencing, people being stranded and causing more issues once it happens.
And I think one other thing, when it came to evacuations, especially for Rita, hopefully this doesn't offend anybody, the public just doesn't listen. We had people from Woodlands and Katy getting on the freeway before people from Galveston had a chance to get off the island. And it's all sequenced and there's timing and everybody's supposed to follow it. But when people in Conroe get on the road, well, then people from Galveston get stuck down in Galveston. So that whole sequence and the timing and really making sure people, hey, we know you want to leave, but your time is not until tomorrow at 6 p.m. You don't need to leave tonight at 8 p.m. We're trying to get people off the island first.
Yeah, well, my only point is that there's 19,000 registered EVs in Harris County right now. So the next big hurricane, I think this is going to be an issue. I think we're going to have stalled EVs on 45. So we can't study this too long.
Yeah, well, and I was talking with Lieutenant Curry and some of the people down DPS down in that area, and we'll push them off the road. I mean, that's kind of unfortunately, that's kind of the discussion now that we got to keep mobility going. And a lot of that's going to fall on DPS and a lot of the smaller entities along the route that once we go to contraflow and people are out there, we're just gonna have to get people off the road, push them off the road. And are we gonna have to have buses to pick people up because now they're stranded? I mean, you can see where it all snowballs from there. And so we started to talk about it, but we really don't have a great plan on how we're going to execute that.
Brian, is it similar to what you do when you have vehicles that run on gas currently?
Yeah, but the advantages with gas is they've staged fuel tankers and fuel bladders all along the route. So they're able to, here's 5 gallons, here's 5 gallons, we'll get you up along the way. And because that was a lesson learned from Rita, where they had people run out of gas. So DPS, TxDOT, they have a very robust plan of how they're going to manage all that through that corridor to get people to their destination.
I wanted to acknowledge Brian Granger put a comment in online about a AAA pilot program where they have a DC fast charger on one of their trucks. So
Oh, cool.
not only can they fix a flat, but the idea would be that they'd be able to recharge.
And again, it might be even down to a simple thing like the communication plan, because we're talking about EVs running out of battery. If EVs then know, or EV drivers know 24 hours before, there is a potential of an evacuation coming. Obviously, then you've got to mitigate people leaving too soon and things like that. But if then the message is, you need to plug your vehicle in there, all of a sudden, potentially you're going to mitigate some, not all, but is that a fix? I don't know, just sort of.
Or do those people have to go to evacuation hub and hop on a bus and they take a bus to San Antonio versus have a car ride?
Take a gasoline vehicle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if they have one.
There's a lot of parallels between natural disaster preparedness and resiliency from a cybersecurity perspective. And the interesting challenge, I think, when it comes to cybersecurity is you're getting a group of people to admit their dirty laundry and what their weaknesses are in the organization. So the question for you all is kind of from a culture perspective and from a process perspective, what practices have you seen in your organization to help people come forward, admit the things that could happen? It's not if I'm going to get hacked, it's when it's going to happen, or the disaster is going to happen. And people are willing to talk about, hey, what can go wrong? This is the problems in my organization, and maybe some things I haven't paid enough attention to. Like, what processes and things have you used to get that on the table so you can be ready for it?
So one of the things that we've been doing, especially with data, it's a new area, it's a new field. There's a lot of learnings that are happening because people haven't been using it. So we've been working with the JPO, USDOT in sharing knowledge and skills. And what does that look like? So, we talk about TxDOT being advanced in this space. You guys really are in adapting these technologies, working with TTI and other universities to get ahead of the curve. And we're putting in place some working groups nationwide in sharing best practice. So people aren't trying to have to invent the wheel. It's, okay, you guys have been using it for this. You guys have been using it for this use case in that way. You know what, we can pick it up and we can run with it quicker. So that way it's going to speed up time to benefit from some of this data. So that's something we've been trying to do.
And I would just think overarching, the concept of Transtar, I think is very unique, everybody together. And you build those relationships, and I mentioned Lieutenant Courage with DPS, not to pick on him, but when you have those relationships, you can have those honest, I don't know what we're gonna do. And we go, okay, well, let's get a little work group together and let's try to work it out. Let's talk it out. It won't be perfect, no, but it will be better than where we were today. So I think just a lot of those relationships. And then Houston, we have lots of events, so we tend to get to exercise our plans in real time quite often. And then we use the term, we don't say lessons learned, we say lessons applied or lessons ignored. And so we try to have no lessons ignored. Sometimes it's not fiscally possible to implement something, but we try to implement everything we can to where we really don't, because you guys know when you have events, it's the same after action items over and over and over again. So that's why we say, well, that was just a lesson ignored that we did, 4 events in a row. Let's fix it this time. Let's make it a lesson applied.
Wonderful. We are a little over time, so we're going to wrap it up here. I think I want to just kind of touch on a few themes here. I'm hearing understanding exactly what happened, learning from that event, what has happened in the past, and how do we proceed with that learned knowledge. I'm hearing data is king. I'm hearing electric vehicles. They may not be there yet, but they are coming. So we need to be prepared for that, as well as just focusing on preparedness for this extreme weather. I'd like to ask the panelists to give 30 seconds each of what is your takeaway from today. Final thoughts.
I'd like to start. It's been enlightening, especially on the data side. So I'm glad to have shared the panel with all of you, frankly. I think we don't do enough of that. Is really, we get in our silos and we're not communicating even as good as communicators I know that we all are, and as important as that is. It's good that this is a subject for this group, and I hope it was an aligning for you guys as it was for me sitting here and listening to colleagues here talk. So thank you.
I feel I'm just going to echo your comments there. I think that the key for us is really being in the room and having these conversations. Because I think to your question, we don't have all the answers. We are not a unicorn. We're just part of the story. But it's then sitting in a room saying, okay, this is your problem. We've got something to potentially help. And then try the best practices that come out of that. I think that's the really exciting bit.
I think data. I didn't realize that there were some things they brought up that I never even thought the data could be used to tell us those type of things. So I hope as they get more information, they get with the operational people and we say, hey, we got this problem. Oh, I got this set of data that may be able to help you out with that problem. So I think as we move forward and we have more of that information, how do we turn it once again into useful intelligence for our decision makers to really start to make some decisions?
Fantastic. So I think let's all get out and collaborate more is what I'm hearing. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Data. That brings us to our closing speaker. We're very glad to have Betsy Hilliard. She's the Chief Science Officer for Valkyrie. We've asked her to come and speak about data. Part of it is just an overview of what is artificial intelligence, what are the variety of applications, but then really how do you connect data into making decisions? And then as the previous panel talked about, it's about that communications plan, getting it out to the right stakeholders, and then ultimately building that public trust. So that, Betsy, I'll turn things over to you.
Great, thank you. Well, yes, data is a great way for me to start any talk. So she said Betsy Hilliard, I'm the Chief Science Officer at Valkyrie. We are an applied AI, machine learning, and knowledge graph firm. We're located in downtown Austin and started in 2017. So we're scientists, and we build bespoke AI ML solutions for our clients, who, go to the next slide, who are mostly in the Fortune 1000 and are really, we're kind of agnostic to what vertical we work in. But really it's, as Brian said, it's turning data into intelligence, right? That's what we're trying to do. So next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the technologies that we are sort of in our niche in particular, and I think actually can really help some of the questions that people have raised today about how do you use data? How do you make sure you're breaking down those data silos? How do you find the interesting things that data can tell you that can solve the problem that you have? I'll talk a little bit, calling it data rules of the road because you guys will get that joke. And then hopefully get into AI ML lifecycle. But before we go on, what's a graph, right? So if you've seen the hype cycle come up several times today, I was giggling a little bit because knowledge graphs are supposedly, according to Gardner, about to go into the trough of despair. So I think Valkyrie is single-handedly going to try to avoid that. You have to keep working on that technology in order to get it out, right? So we see wins with our clients. I'm going to show you a lot of client use cases, and we see wins with graphs. We're seeing them now in production with real clients who have products that you've heard of or use. But first, what's a graph? It's not a chart, right? Bar chart, not the same as a graph. A graph is a data structure that is a combination of nodes and edges, usually depicted as circles and lines. So on the right here is a graph of a social network. So you've got individuals that are interacting. I think this is with like help pages for a certain software. And so like the red is the individuals and the red is the pages and the blue the individuals who are writing comments on those pages. So you can connect these edges, connect these nodes. And then that really is sort of the next step in providing intelligence on data. I also have the Boston subway system. So I'll show you some more examples that are in the transportation space of graphs, but transportation is naturally a graph, right? You've got cities, you've got edges, which are roads that are connecting those cities or connecting locations. And so there's a different type of graph, it's a network flow graph. But a lot of the algorithms, those math things that help us turn data into intelligence, were actually built because of provocations from transportation. So I'll talk about that in a little bit too. The next slide. So here, I'm a little bit of a transportation nerd in a way because my father just finished a 40-year career at the National Transportation Center, Transportation Research Center out of ORNL in Tennessee. So I grew up listening to transportation problems over the dinner table and on the way to school. So should really what motivated me to do the work I do is because I loved hearing about these problems. So graphs have their origins in transportation. The first real graph problem was the bridges of Kongsberg, which was really about how a town liked to spend their Sunday afternoons trying to walk across bridges between the islands in their town that were formed by this river. That work, a mathematician worked on it, and those algorithms are now used for everything for DNA sequencing, but also delivery planning. So for how are your packages delivered? And what order does that Amazon Prime truck drive in? So some transportation, some totally non-transportation applications. The one on the left, the one on the left is a depiction of the railroads connecting Eastern Russia with Western Europe. This came from the 1950s and is the reason that we have the Maxwell-Mincutt algorithm, which if you are a computer scientist, it's a big deal. But that algorithm is now used for everything from internet security to image segmentation to airline scheduling. So you're in a space that is naturally graph happy. So congratulations, transportation. We're not bending over backwards to fit to your problem. So next slide. So why do we use graphs? There's lots of types of graphs, knowledge graphs, those are going to be useful when you're trying to figure out, we have all this data in TxDOT. How do we start joining it, making it talk to each other so that we can move to that intelligence level? That's how do you structure, okay, what do I know about a traffic event or a planned construction event? How do I combine all the data that I have about those things in a way that lots of different people can use it and can generate insights? There's also graph theory. We use graph theory techniques to be able to measure a graph and actually create what are called features for machine learning algorithms. And that's the data that we use to teach the algorithm, teach the computer, here are these features, and based on those features, we can predict or classify what's going to happen in the future. That's the goal. And then graph databases. So graph databases are sort of like a relational database that's already been pre-joined in an intelligent way. So if you deal with data, joining data is really the art. How do you join it? What do you join? How do you do that? It's complicated, it's time consuming, people do it wrong all the time. That's why if you ask a data person, can you answer this question? If it takes a long time, it's probably a new join that they've never done before and it's hard. So graph databases, thinking of it as relational databases that are actually valuing relationships. Just crazy idea. Okay, so graphs. Graphs are sort of the AI technology I wanted to introduce you to. We use them for lots of our different clients. Clients are kind of all over the vertical space, as I said, but we've used them for a telecom provider, venture capital in finance uses graphs a lot. They're probably some of the biggest successes right now coming out of that, but also Department of Defense, and then some other more transportation related use cases that I'll talk about. So industry challenges. I think the one that I was thinking about the most today, with what I heard, comes out of a major car manufacturer that we're working with. So they want to be able to plan how they're going to instrument their vehicle. What are they going to do as their vehicles become more connected, as their vehicles become more software driven, right? Whereas what they're providing is actually software in the car, not just the hardware of the car. And so what we're doing is we're actually helping them build, some people say digital twin, multi-agent modeling. Those are the techniques. We're helping them build a picture of their population now in a way that we can project out and help them make decisions about as their users and vehicles or customers and vehicles change over time. They can predict, okay, 10 years down the road, if I introduce this feature, who's going to adopt it? How are they going to use this new feature? They're also interested, this is sort of new work that we're working on, of how do they place their own potential electric vehicle charging so that they can provide for their customers, right? They know where their customers are. They know the ones that they want to buy their next vehicle. They know the ones that are maybe sort of thinking about an EV, but won't do it because they live in one of those charging deserts that we've heard about. So they're looking at solving this problem. So I was fascinated to hear that like my dad's colleagues in TRC were talking about like electric vehicles, TxDOT's talking about electric vehicle charging deserts and the car manufacturers, right? So everyone's talking about that, and I think that means that we're going to find a solution. So that's exciting. Another example is in wayfinding. So both that car manufacturer as well as a tech audio media provider want to be able to predict a driver's intended destination and reason for their trip so that they can offer points of interest along the way, right? So that they can actually make recommendations that are possibly, ads, marketing income for them, or just good experiences for their customers. We were working with some groups that provide fleet maintenance. That's not a graph application, it's just an AI machine learning application, but helping them optimize the placement and pricing of their services. Next slide. Freight planning. So there's a company, they provide great solutions connecting customers to trucking providers. They have to be able to plan for problems, particularly in optimizing less than truckload drives, and that's something we're looking at app applications for. And it's a tech company that can measure vibrations in fiber optic cables. And right now they use it to detect digging. It's going to cut that fiber optic cable, but there's tons of applications in the smart city planning space as well. So rules of the road here. Always think about data security and privacy. That's been brought up several times today, right? So you're using data, think about privacy, security. One thing to note, you can't have privacy if you don't have security. It's just kind of impossible. Avoid data silos. The most common, if you leave here today, the most common problem, failure that I see, reasons why our customers can't get over the line is their data is siloed and they're unwilling to change about it, or it's controlled by fiefdoms. The number of people problems in data silos is large. Usually it's not that the technologies can't connect, it's that someone thinks they own that data and they don't, right? The organization owns that data, the public owns that data. A larger group of people really need access to that data. So looking in your organizations and saying who is sort of has a fiefdom over data and trying to avoid those situations. So democratizing that data access and documenting your data are really good ways to avoid data silos. And then looking for data bias. So data bias, you hear a lot in the news. I'm not talking just about demographics. That is important. But your algorithms, your machine learning algorithms, your approaches are going to fail if your data is biased. And what do I mean by that? So what scenarios are you missing? What's overrepresented or underrepresented in your data? Data has to be actively collected, which means someone made decisions about where it's collected, when it's collected, what's kept, what's not kept, what's recorded. And anytime you're making those decisions, you're introducing bias into the data that makes it into your systems. So think about that. On the next slide, I'll do my little favorite picture. This is a picture of a plane in World War II. The red dots are all of the locations where the planes that made it back to the base had bullet holes in them. And someone said, oh, let's just map this all out over all of our planes, and then we'll go in and we'll reinforce where all the red dots are so that our planes won't come down, right? It won't be shot or shot down. And statistician was like, no, bad idea. Reinforce where there aren't dots, where there aren't bullet holes, because those are the planes that you never saw again because they went down over the ocean, right? So this is called survivorship bias. It's just a really good example that tends to stick in people's head of the data you're collecting has bias. Survivorship bias is one of the biggest ones in data collection. Who didn't even get recorded, right? Because they didn't survive the data collection process. So I know we're at time. Some other things to think about: legal collection. If there's anyone who builds machine learning or computer systems in the room, knowing the outcome. Lots of times people collect all the data about the situation, but they don't collect, was it a good outcome? Were people happy? Did people use the detour that I put around TxDOT this morning? Right. How many people use those? Did it work for people? Or did you find that people were zooming off in other parking lots, completely lost, staring at their phones, possibly getting in wrecks, right? Collect the data about what happened, because that's the only way you're going to be able to make changes about how those things happen in the future. You talked a little bit about data interoperability. That's a place where something like TxDOT can set a standard for the state and be really valuable, right? Government can really provide a lot of value there in setting standards because it's a group that people look to, right? That involves policy, but it also involves asking good experts about what should the data collection process, naming, normalization, and then data quality, which is just, garbage in, garbage out, is a really key thing to think about. So I won't go into all of this. My main takeaway, this is for the future data scientists that you work with and data people that you work with. Getting the data in shape to do whatever you've asked them to do is 80% of the problem, 80% of the time. So be patient with them, please. That's the hard part, right? So that's what we talk about when we're talking about research and wrangling, right? That's the first stage of the data AI/ML process. It's really probably 70% of the time before you start moving into experimentation and evaluation. That's where we're building models, figuring out how are you going to actually, you, the user, your customers, policymakers going to use the output of machine learning or AI, and building the actual system, iterating the system. And then development and deployment is this last stage. Integrating with your systems, making sure that it works now, but also crucially, is making sure that you know when you need to retrain these models that you're building. When you need to go back, pull the data again, decide, hey, things have changed in the world, and therefore my machine learning model, my AI needs to change as well. I'm a little bit fast, and just the high level, again, I'm Betsy, with Operate, and would love to talk to anyone who's got questions now or after.
Time for one, maybe two quick questions from, like I said, are the task force members.
I love your logo. After that presentation.
Yeah.
Oh, the graphs.
That's the logo.
Yeah, our CEO might be a little.
We have data analysts. We can't afford data scientists.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding. Very, very nice president. It is.
I have a question. Sometimes traditional statistics is good enough to solve problems.
Yeah.
And so for the audience in the room, like, can you give us a real top level view of like, when does AI make sense and when does it not?
A great question. So, some people would argue that machine learning is just applied statistics on steroids with more data, right? And like better computer systems, right? I don't really argue with that. That's machine learning at least. I'd say the AI comes in when you're making decisions in the real world and it's not a human making decisions, right? So if we're coming back, if your data scientist statistician is coming back with recommendations and a human board is sitting and looking at it for a couple of days and making a decision, that's probably technically statistics, and you could do it with a statistician as long as they can handle the data scale and the data complexity, right? Some can, some can't. But if you wanted to make decisions in short time periods, huge scale, or you're entering with data that's computer vision, that's natural language, that's messy, that's non-standard in some way, or you really need the benefit of a graph, right, to be able to really depict your full data landscape. That's where you move into the MLAI space.
Ask one more question.
Yeah.
As a transportation agency group, how can we use ChatGPT for something valuable near term? Or in general, what kind of problems is that great for? What's your assessment of that?
So it's being able to rapidly turn facts that you can provide to it into natural language that sounds pretty, right? Do not expect it to give you facts. It does not produce facts. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It doesn't tell you, at least now, if it is or isn't going to. So it doesn't provide facts. Use it to write your emails so that you're spending less time writing emails. Go for it, right? But just give it the facts you want it to share. Bullet points, it does go with that. But don't expect it to be able to just like write your communications on how to evacuate from Houston and get it right. Or if you do, proofread. Because it might be like, and then you fly to DC. No, it's not the option.
I was in a conversation yesterday with a business lady, and she gets enormous amount of emails, and she uses it for the draft of her emails to get 80% of it done. And then she goes in, she just gives it the parameters, boom, she goes back, corrects it, send.
Yeah.
And so she said she uses it for that.
It seems to be also good if you're a software engineer. 75% of the time, it can like find the bug in your code. At least, that's what my team said. Okay.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, first things first. Someone's checked out from up here with me. So you don't have it. I've got it. Nice enough, turned in up here. We want you to lose it. So another great day. I really appreciate all y'all that stayed through the whole day, and those that came after lunch. Appreciate you so much. Both great discussions. Really fired up. And it was a real compliment. I thought you were a student. But more fired up that you're here in Austin because I know a whole group of data people in TxDOT that want to go meet with you at Pine House or somewhere and talk a lot more.
Great.
The EV charging discussion, just so you know, it's already set up a firestorm of emails in the department about who's got responsibility, what are we going to do? And I want to point that out because that's what I mean about what the value of this task force is. We bring in these topics, they may be long ranging, but they're forcing us to think about things we may not have discussed. And we have offhandedly at different times mentioned that exact issue, but it's obviously more pertinent as we get closer to more reform. You're right, I think 150,000 registered EVs in Texas when I looked last week, and just so it was like 60,000 the same time last year. So it has greatly scaled up in the last year just because of a lot of things that incentivize that. Emergency data. I didn't mention that earlier. We've been working for at least, it seems like 8 months now, on the capability to take road construction data, not only for the long-term projects, things like start point, end point, specific lane, but also more temporary ones. And then truly, putting the cones out. And then following that with traffic incident, and we already published flood data for our system, but we don't have a statewide integrated one. But the point being, we're working to not only facilitate that with all of our construction crews to get that more rapidly into our system and into Drive Texas, but then to also push that out from Drive Texas to all the mapping companies that you can name, and inclusive of freight mapping companies, or not the freight systems themselves. And we haven't really been talking about it a lot because there's some contractual stuff involved, and we're also looking at a couple of variables, but that is in the works. And that longer term things like the contraflow would be a part. I mean, we kind of do that when there's flooding. We show where we've blocked off the roads, but it's not necessarily this corridor just became this. So that would probably be the next step, but it is in the works. Some things coming up, the spring statewide Transportation Innovation Council is May 4th. So just a couple of weeks from now, back here at Stastny, and someone will be July 25th. Next Tech Task Force meeting is the 13th of June. We already talked to you about the Innovation Invitational. We're going to be talking to all of our Innovation Alliance member teams that you could, Arlington, San Antonio, El Paso, and Houston, and everywhere in between all that. And we're going to kind of do a Shark Tank we did this 5-6 years ago when we stood up the Innovation Alliance as a part of the Smart Cities effort. And we have all those teams come in with their specific community challenges and they get to engage the industry, find out what type of technology solutions are out there and how they might help their community challenges, and actually build out the solution. What do they want to do to address that community challenge? And then we help them refine that into a sales pitch effectively, both for federal grants as well as selling their needs to industry and bringing those partners. It's a fantastic couple of days of work, and then we'll come back later in the fall to recognize the top ones from our perspective, and hopefully we'll have some hope for them if we recognize them. Working on that too. Tech Task Force webpage. If you want, we can obviously we've been recording this. It is on our external webpage, our TxDOT external webpage under About Programs, Innovative Transportation Tech Task Force. And we have everything going about 3 years back. Just noticed this week that we didn't post the last 2, so we're going to fix that. But this will be up soon, so that if you want to go back and see the recordings, anything you missed, it's there for you to look at, as well as the agenda and other products. And then I'll just close out with love graphs. ITS America is here in Texas in a couple of weeks, the 24th to the 27th of April. So it'll be heavy Texas attendance from TxDOT and others. And if you're interested in everything that is intelligent transportation systems, I encourage you to go. And you'll see a lot of us there talking about more of what we're doing in that space. Shortly thereafter, the Association of Unmanned Vehicle Systems is up in Denver. A couple of weeks later, 8 to 9 May. There's an Intelligent Infrastructure Conference here, 6-7 June in Austin. And then to wrap up the next few months, the Association of American Society of Civil Engineers is meeting the 14th to 17th of June in Austin. And I mention all those because a lot of what we talk about will be talked about again, in some cases, deep dives. And like I said, a lot of TxDOT and other Texas people will be there. So welcome you to meet us there and continue to work. As always, thank you. You know, what you guys bring to the table in terms of both questions as well as identifying people to come speak to us is invaluable. And I hope I'm conveying how much we're taking back and actually bringing, you know, to what we do. So questions to me?
Just an observation. I mean, if you go back to when we started trying to be, you know, a voice to advanced technology and to be a home for technology companies to help grow the interest in Texas. I don't know when we started, 15 years ago or so. How long?
I think 2013.
Yeah, 2013.
10 years. We got to sit back and really feel good there. Your team needs to really feel good. UT needs to feel good. The students who now have PhDs need to feel good. You know, we're on the map of so many technology companies that now call us home. The whole technology transfer that now that you see naturally occurs between these technology companies, it's only going to get better. It's an amazing ability. And then when we start getting technology into helping us with safety, start really tearing down silos between other elements, it even generates even more excitement. So I applaud the team. We come 2 or 3 times a year, whatever our involvement is, but you guys are at this constantly, and we very much appreciate it.
I'll feel better when I can see it physically and know what's happening and know that people notice it. But we're so close on so many things. It's pretty exciting. And every time I get really giddy about how, you know, tech, don't worry, Josh comes along and drops a cybersecurity pill in my throat. Reminds me of all those things that got to make sure we're squared away on as well. But it's good. And I think that we've made a pretty strong effort in the IT division to stay abreast of that as a component of everything we're working on. So thank you.
Here, and I have one.
Yes, sir.
One comment as I listened today, there was something that came up, and it's about the charging infrastructure, right? And it was about permits and the long lead time for permits. And I've heard this in other states and localities. And what I've encouraged is, okay, who's doing it right in your state? What city is doing it right? Look at what their model ordinances are, and then replicate them. And maybe this is an MPO type thing. It's probably not a TxDOT thing, but an MPO thing that says, hey, here's how let's do a deep dive into the permitting process, because
We actually talked about it, 100% correct. Why isn't there a smart team that's created? That's hard for TxDOT to do at the local level. But the local level doesn't have the economies of scale to know that this is a real problem, because they're just looking at it from their own jurisdiction. But can you imagine 15 people that include the electric company, the technology company, the permit company, the legal people, and there are smart teams that move around, and there's a certain priority maybe that has to occur. Imagine that smart team sort of back to this moonshot notion, where they can expedite this, create model ordinances and so on and so forth. I would challenge the grassroots teams that you have. And I would pose that as a question. Your conference is coming up. Hey, we're hearing from the technology task force, as the federal government and the state government created a statewide electric plan for recharging. Federal government's investing $27 trillion, $400 billion. We're hearing permits is a problem. Who's good? Are there smart teams that can do it? How does that get expedited? Challenge one or two of those groups from Arlington or Plano or Houston or San Antonio and see if they want to take that on and be sort of this, it would be horrible if the technology is there, the money's there, but the human capital to figure it out is.
And I'm bumping into it, it's not just technical, I bumped into it in a lot of other places it's a local issue and it's getting the thing set up. And it's, some ordinance somewhere that is just messing things up. And I think that it would be absolutely horrible to run through this. Oh, well, we got all the money, we have all the technology, but we can't.
And now we got to send the money back because we couldn't do it fast.
Right.
I'm hearing AMBO is gonna fix that. Right.
I haven't heard that.
No, it's a great point, great takeaway. Any others? All right, thank y'all for being here today and have a great rest of the week.